Hello and welcome to my Floss Tube channel. I'm Farish and we are here together to talk about cross stitch. So I want to start with just a little bit of a health update. I am sleeping so much better. I cannot even begin to describe to you how different I feel having the proper equipment for sleep apnea and following the doctor's orders to the T, and I just have so much more energy. I feel wonderful. Had that big travel trip for a month, been back for a couple of weeks and playing catch up. So between the months that I didn't make videos and the month that I was traveling and the couple of weeks it's taken me to get back in the groove since I've been home, I have really neglected my FAQs. So I really want to focus on that today. But before I do, I'm going to follow up on one aspect of the success cycle thing that I talked about in the last episode. I hope that your takeaway from that is to prepare each day for the next day, to be ready for the next thing, and that will just set you up for success. But I also realized in just my own personal journey that one of the things that has made a huge difference to me is each day, to end that day, identifying something that I am really looking forward to the next day. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be taking a walk with a friend. It can be making a phone call to someone. It can be sitting down and reading a chapter of a book that you've been longing to read. And I just think for me anyway, there's something about as I get ready for bed to start thinking about the next day and think about something that I really, really want to do. I think that is somewhat tying into this renewed energy that I'm getting, and just feeling like that finally my body is keeping up with all of my creative brain activity. And so there's a lot of things that I have really been looking forward to doing that I just haven't felt up to doing. So one of those things is something I'm going to be sharing with you next week. Not quite ready to have it on display this week. And it has to do with the whole holiday season approaching. Part of it is the gratitude aspect that we associate with Thanksgiving. Part of it is the Christmas season of peace and joy. And part of it is New Year's, of looking forward to a time when you can start a new chapter, when you can turn a page and sort of looking back on the year as far as what you've accomplished and looking forward as to what you would like to do. So all these things together have inspired me to start this really big project, at least a big project for me. So I'm sorry to leave you hanging, but I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it, except to say that this whole thing of, again, ending my day by identifying something that I really want to do the next day. And in this case, it's work, but it's a project I just can't wait to get done and to share with you. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Maybe So, are you a planner? I find that if I make a list of things to do, I get so much more done than if I am really scattered about how I'm going to spend my time. I also like to reflect on things as far as after the fact of let's say if I go to a retreat or teach a class, to think about the people that I've met. And so, and there's a lot of sort of spreadsheet organizational things that I use in my business. So I've kind of put all that together and decided to sort of throw my hat into the ring of people who create cross-stitch planners. That's also like a journal. That's also like an organizer. And so that's what I've been working on. And like I say, I'm not ready to share it yet, but I will be next week. So if you are thinking about buying one, wait a week, because hopefully you'll consider mine, and it may be exactly what you've been looking for. So anyway, that's been my thing that I've gotten up in the morning and just couldn't wait to get out of bed to be working on. All right, so let me start with one of the more common questions that I get, especially like this time of the year. And that is how to get on our mailing list for the Stitchers Escapes cruises. Now I'm going to put the website up there on the screen, and I will also put it in the episode notes with a link directly to it. They really, I sort of say the best way, but really the only way to get on our mailing list is to subscribe to our newsletter. Now, let me just say that we do not flood your inbox with lots and lots of emails. We send out emails about cruises when we're ready to announce one, which we will be doing in the next month or so. And we send out emails when registration is getting ready to open. Other than that, you're not, if you sign up for this newsletter, don't feel like you're going to be getting 20 emails a week from us, because that's just not going to happen. First of all, we don't have time to write them. So that's one thing I just wanted to say. We are getting ready to announce the details for our 2024 cruise. And so again, the best way to get that information is to simply be on our email list, so you get the newsletter as soon as we're ready to announce it. Okay, so recently I had a delightful conversation by way of email with a viewer who wrote to me asking how to interpret various ways that symbols are put on a chart. Now, this conversation was not about one of my designs, and I was absolutely happy to help her kind of find her way with another designer's works. So what I'm about to say is in no way, shape, or form a criticism of the way anybody else charts things, nor is it the be-all and end-all. So I guess one thing to do when you are confused about a chart is to reach out to the designer if you can't figure it out. But there are, I think, some general things that I can share. And what was basically confusing the stitcher was what happens when there seems to be a fairly random symbol that is similar to all the other symbols, or similar to another symbol, but just smaller, but it's not really in the square. So that's what I want to talk about right now. And I prepared a couple of sketches here that to help illustrate this. But already I'm thinking about one I didn't illustrate, but we'll figure that out as we're going along. Okay, so let's start with the simple one. There's one symbol right smack dab in the middle of a square on the chart. That means you've got one cross stitch in one Aida square, or if you're stitching on linen or one of the even weaves and stitching over two, then that's one cross stitch where two linen threads are crossing two linen threads. If you're stitching over one, then hopefully that's clear in the directions that the whole chart will be stitched over one, in which case it's one full cross stitch over the intersection of one thread crossing one thread. Now, let me just, as a footnote, say that if there's any chart that is all full cross stitches and was originally intended to be stitched over 2, it can be stitched over 1. And if it's stitched over 2 on linen, it can be stitched on Aida. So let's just get that little bit of housekeeping out of the way. So what happens when you have I'll just sketch this out here. So you have a square on the chart, and it has one symbol up here and one symbol right here. So the classic thing for this is that is intended to be the area of a cross stitch that's going to be more than one color. So it's probably going to end up looking like where within that square you have the image of a whole cross stitch, but 3/4 of it is one color, and 1/4 is another color. Now, unless you've got a really clear photo, and hopefully you do, what you don't know from this is which part is 1/4 and which part is 3/4. I don't know of any universal way that is shown. So what's a stitcher to do? How are you going to know when to stitch which color? So my advice is to look at the design. Let's say, for example, this is a face. And if this is part of the shape of the profile of the face, and then this is going to be background, then I would do the face as the 3/4 stitch. But let's say if this is a face, but this is the hair, and the hair is like in front of the face, like bangs or whatever, then I would have done this with the hair. So this would be the hair color, and this would be the face color. So you have to interpret the design a little bit. I would say in general that whatever is the foreground or the dominant part of the image, do that as the 3/4 stitch and the other part as the 1/4 stitch. Now, again, there's no hard and fast rule here, and you're just going to have to kind of play with it. But that's how I would interpret it. So that's one thing that stitchers come across very often that this new stitcher was asking me about. The other thing she asked me about is what happens when you get, sometimes you end up with a square on the chart that might have 2 symbols at the top and a different 2 symbols at the bottom. So what is that going to look like? And I'm thinking that what you would end up with, 2 small symbols at the top and 2 other symbols at the bottom, then that is how I would interpret that. And if they're side by side, then they would be elongated. This is a design function that I don't often use. I doubt if I've had more than a dozen quarter stitches in all my designs forever, but I'm pretty sure that this is what, in general, other designers do. The other question that she had was pretty specific, but I thought it was a great question and I wanted to share it with you. She said, there's another part of the chart where there's like these random tiny little symbols without anything else in the square, and she didn't know how to do them. So it took me a while to look at this, and I finally Googled the design that she was working on, and this is what I came up with. So what she was describing was this, where in the various squares of the chart, there were tiny little symbols that were just in a corner with nothing else. So I just went back and drew a line on the diagonal where each one of those squares, and then started thinking about how I would stitch that. And this is what I came up with. So I thought it was I forgot to start my close-up camera. Hold on. All right, here we go. So this is what she described, where there's a little symbol in the corner. And so if I went back and drew the diagonal lines on each one of those squares, then thought about how I was going to stitch it, which would be using 3/4 stitches, this is what I came up with, which, looks like a star, which I thought was very clever. And that seemed to help her out. So maybe it will help you too with some chart that you're going to do sometime. And then I had another charming conversation with somebody about backstitch. And I realized that when new stitchers are doing backstitch that's unassociated with cross stitch nearby, they sometimes don't know how to begin and end that thread. Now, if you have an area of cross stitch and you're going to be adding detail with the backstitch and stitching with a single strand, easy enough just to bury that thread under the nearby cross stitches and just start going. But what if you're doing lettering? What if you're doing something that doesn't have other cross stitches nearby that you are going to be burying your thread? And if you're stitching with a single strand, how do you bury that single strand? So this is what I do. But I remember to start my camera this time. All right, so I've got a single strand right here. This happens to be flower thread. So let's say if I am, I don't like how this lighting is kind of casting a shadow here. So if I'm going to start stitching here, so I take my first back stitch and, oops, I don't want to do that. And then on the back, I'm just going to pull that through, and I'm just going to hold on to that tail for just a moment. So now, of course, since I'm back stitching, I'm going to be working from right to left. So each stitch is actually stitched from left to right. So now with the second stitch here, now just by chance I have caught that thread, so that's good. So now I want to take the next one. What I'm going to do on the back is I'm going to make sure that I catch that thread. And I'm just going to go back and forth like that. So that's my third stitch. And now I'll take another one here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that thread in the other direction. So I'm kind of going back and forth between the two directions. So now take another stitch, and on the back I'm going to catch that thread and pull it through this way. All right, so now at this point that's buried under 4 threads. I would say if I do one more, then I'm good to go. Okay, so now at this point, as always, I'm going to cut this close. Now I'm going to leave a little itty bitty tail. I mean, just like not even 1/8 of an inch there. And so now I am ready to go, and I can just keep stitching here. Again, remember, a back stitch, whatever direction you are creating the line in, you're stitching in the opposite direction. It is a back stitch. Think of a backstroke with swimming or anything of that nature. And that's how you. So when it comes time to end the thread, I do a similar thing. So let me do a little stitching here, and then I'll demonstrate that. I should probably say here that you're seeing that I'm stitching very close to the selvage, and I would not normally do that in a project. I'm just demonstrating how to do something here, and so I'm just trying to be conservative about this piece of Aida, and know that I'll be doing other test stitching on it. So do keep that in mind. I don't want to be sending the wrong message to anyone. Okay, so now I have stitched another line here. So let's say if I'm at the end of that area. So now on the back, I'm just going to basically do the opposite of what I did when I started. I'm going to take my thread through this way, and then under the next stitch, I'm coming down this way, and then I'm going up this way. Now, the reason I'm doing this is I want to keep the back as flat as possible. I hesitate to show you the wrong way to do things, but I'm going to, because what a lot of people do is they end up doing a whip stitch. So let's say if I go like this from the top down, and then I go from the top down again, I basically have created a whip stitch over top of my stitching, and you're going to end up with much more of a ridge there than if you just kind of go back and forth like that. So that's how I both begin and end a thread, a single thread, when I'm doing back stitch that's unassociated with any cross stitch that's nearby. So I hope that helps. And then associated with that is the question, how do you, when doing, let's say, lettering, how do you get from one letter to another without dragging your thread across? And here is a general rule of thumb. If you carry your thread on the back, on the diagonal, then it is much less likely to show than if you carry it straight across. Because when you carry it straight across, it's sort of like, it's like looking in a window. You can see where that line is going across. But so when you're doing lettering, experiment with this. When you finish a letter and you're getting ready to go to the next letter, see if you can't carry your thread over on an angle. It doesn't have to be a 45-degree angle, on some kind of an angle rather than straight up or straight across. And I think that you'll find that it's a lot less evident than when you carry it any other way. So again, I hope that helps. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about terminology. This wasn't an FAQ as much as it was a discussion on one of the many stitching Facebook groups. I do fall down the rabbit hole every once in a while on Facebook. I will confess to that. So someone posted something about how she was stitching over 2 on Aida. And it ended up that she, in fact, was indeed stitching so that each cross stitch covered 4 Aida squares, 2 squares wide and 2 squares high. And her confusion came about because she was following a chart that was intended for linen. And again, if it's full cross stitch on linen, there's absolutely no reason why you cannot do it on Aida. But where she was confused was she thought that the designer was directing her to stitch over 2 on Aida. Now, traditionally, Aida is not stitched over 2. It's not, I guess technically it's stitched over 1. If you look really carefully at an Aida square, it's 4 threads interwoven in one direction and 4 threads interwoven in the other direction. That is how an Aida square is created. Do we say you're stitching 4 over 4? No. And in fact, in my opinion, you don't even use that lingo at all when you're talking about Aida. When you're talking about Aida, you're stitching a cross stitch in each square. Now, I love non-traditional uses of things. And so, man, if you want to stitch over 3 squares wide and 3 squares high, that's fine. Be aware it's going to be a whole lot bigger. So I just want to say that, you know, language has always, in every society, allowed people to speak clearly and to be understood clearly by each other. And that's why, to me, it's important to use our terminology right. Again, I'm not being judgmental. I'm not trying to police anybody. I'm just trying to maybe open your mind to be careful about how you use terminology, so that you can both understand others clearly and be understood by people clearly. It just, just having the same meaning for terms just goes a long way in making sure that everybody understands everybody else. So in this case, if you check the directions and see that the designer is talking about stitching over 2 because her sample was done on linen or even weave, then that might help understand what you're supposed to do. So generally you're not going to say I stitched 2 over 2 on Aida, because 2 over 2 implies that I'm stitching with 2 strands, and I'm stitching so that I'm using linen or even weave. So I've got 2 threads crossing 2 threads. And while I'm thinking about this, let me just be upfront about this. I know that this is getting really, really petty. It makes me crazy when people talk about how if you stitch over 2 compared to over 1, that the design will be twice as big. And actually, it will be 4 times as big. It will be twice as wide and twice as high. So if something is 10 inches by 10 inches, that's 100 square inches. If now it's going to be 20 inches wide and 20 inches high, that's 20 times 20, just 400. And 400 is 4 times bigger than 100. So just as an FYI. So here's a really practical question from someone. She said, I was wondering about your thoughts on what you use as lotion and keeping your hands clean. I'm going to tell you, I think that I'm pretty clean, but I am not one of those stitchers that runs off and washes my hands before I sit down and stitch. Now, if my hands need to be washed, then yeah, I'm going to wash them. But that said, I'm also the one who washes and irons every piece before I finish it. So since I wash my projects before I frame them or do any other kind of finishing, I have the luxury of being a little less concerned about what I put on my hands in terms of moisturizer. I have very dry skin, and so I use moisturizer all the time. I cannot wash my hands without adding some kind of lotion right away. Now, there are lotions out there that are sold and marketed for stitchers. I don't have any personal experience with them, and I don't have any professional knowledge as far as what is the ingredient that makes them more stitcher friendly than another. In fact, one of my favorite lotion, I can't even call it a lotion. It's even thicker. It actually, when I put it on my hands look sort of oily, but it doesn't take long at all before it's absorbed. It's more like it's more the consistency of like an ointment than it is a cream or a lotion. But that's how dry my hands are. So if you're not going to wash your piece before you fully finish it, I think you would be wise to be careful. But again, I'm sorry, I don't have any information that I can share as far as ingredients to avoid or ingredients to look for or whatever. I wish I could help you, but I can't. Okay, now this next question is one of the absolute most common questions I get. and that is when I pull my threads from a floss drop, do I pull, and I'm going to be stitching with 2 strands. Let's say if it's variegated or for some reason I can't start the loop method, do I take out 1 strand and lay it down and take the other one out and make sure that it matches? And my answer to that question is no. Well, if it's variegated, then yes, I'm very careful about that because of the color. But this question was more about twist than about color. So forget the variegated part. I'm muddying the waters by even bringing it up. And this kind of comes back to the question of using the loop method. There are many people who are adamantly opposed to using the loop method because they are convinced that when you use the loop method, that I've taken the strand and I've reversed the direction, and so the twist is going to be different. And I'm here to say that that is just not true. Now, the evidence that I want to use to prove my point is not unique to me. I found this on a Floss Tube episode from Yvette Stanton, and I'll include a link in my episode notes to her video because I do want to acknowledge that she is the original thinker about this. And what Yvette used to prove her point is a piece of twisted cord. So let me get my camera set up here and I'll show you what I mean. So this is a piece of twisted cord that I made. So that's representing floss. Now, if you look really carefully at a single strand of your floss, so you've got 6 strands that are packaged together, take out 1 strand and tease it a little bit, and you'll see that it's actually 2 threads twisted together. Those are called plies, okay? So you've got your 2 plies that are twisted together to make a single strand of floss. Okay, so notice that this twist is going in that direction. If I turn this around as if I'm making a loop start, isn't my twist lying in the same direction? So that is just, to me, proof positive that this whole thing about that you have to be careful of always taking your strand out from the same end of the skein, of not ever using a loop start, this to me proves that that is just not true. Quick question with a quick answer. Is Cosmo Floss washable? Absolutely. I just added a whole bunch of floss packs to my Etsy store. This is one of the ones that's one of the more popular ones where I've packaged up. They actually have 4 colors that if you looked at each one of them by itself, you would say, oh, that's black. But there's actually 4 different numbers: 600, 601, 602. 603 is a very, very dark brown. For DMC, it'd be very similar to 3371. And then packaged it with colors that are like in the whites. And so that's one of the floss packs that's in my Etsy store. And yes, Cosmo Floss is color fast. Okay. Wow, I'm looking at my list of questions, and I think that's pretty much the end of it. So next week, I'm going to, this is rare, I don't usually tell you ahead of time what I'm going to be doing, but next week I'm going to show you a very inexpensive and easy way to finish a small project. Kind of thinking holiday, and that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to be sharing with you my planner journal organizer project, and I hope that you're going to love it as much as I have. And right now, I'm sure I'll say this next week, but once I put it out there, I am going to cherish feedback. I want to hear from stitchers to know, is it useful? Is it helpful? what are features that you wish I had included that I didn't, or what are some things I included that you wish I hadn't included, whatever. So I'm going to be really listening to feedback from the people that are the intended users, because that's what's important to me. So, all right, so between now and next week, stitch happy, stay safe, and I'll see you then.